Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly.
Donald Trump is returning to the White House, and with him and his team comes a new resolve from Washington to negotiate an end to Russia's war against Ukraine. Talk of peace and negotiations has been in the air more and more since Trump's election victory in November. Now, the time of grand promises has passed and the time of action has arrived. But as we enter a new Trump term, we know very little about the reality of what his plan really is and how it could play out in practice. Across Western media coverage, when we hear about some kind of negotiated peace between Russia and Ukraine, the same phrases and buzzwords like freezing the conflict, ceding territory, security guarantees keep popping up over and over and over again.
Ukraine is preparing for possible negotiations to end the war.
Come to the negotiation table, sit down, work this out.
He's not necessarily ceding sovereign territorial control.
What Ukraine wants are security guarantees.
But how do we actually get to that point in reality? My name is Farrell. I'm a reporter here at the Kyiv Independent, and today I want to help you navigate through the noise and talk about what really needs to happen for this war to end, and what the different endgame scenarios could mean for the future of Ukraine and Russia. Now, we can't talk about the end of this war without understanding what is happening with the war as we speak. So for that reason, I want to start with a quick refresher on the battlefield, where the fight rages on as intensely as ever. Russia is on the offensive on multiple fronts, throwing an endless stream of men and equipment at Ukrainian lines. It's important to remember that this full-scale war has never been a stalemate. After Russia's failed attempt to take Kyiv quickly, they turned to a strategy of attrition to break the ability of Ukraine's military to defend the country along hundreds of kilometers of front line. And despite countless humiliations for Moscow, from destroyed ships in the Black Sea to the Kursk Oblast incursion, Russia has stuck to its plan, and it looks like it slowly could be working. Ukraine is fighting hard, but plagued by manpower shortages, its forces are badly overstretched, especially in southern Donetsk Oblast, where Russia took more territory each month over summer and autumn. Russia's advances are coming at a great cost, but Moscow's calculation is that it can degrade Ukraine's potential to stay in the fight quicker than the other way around. This is the same Russia, of course, that started this full-scale invasion with an attempt to take the Ukrainian capital. The same Russia that claims a lot more Ukrainian territory as its own than it controls now, after illegally annexing 4 regions in 2022. Maybe now they feel victory is closer than ever. So, what does that mean for peace? If we want to talk about the end of the war, the really big question is, why should Russia stop? If a peace plan doesn't start and end with an answer to this question, it's not a very serious plan. To help us answer that question, let's imagine a future where the war has ended. Several alternate futures, to be precise. What are the different scenarios for peace that we could actually see? In this video, we will look only at scenarios that are based in the reality on the ground here in Ukraine. Wishful thinking, like imagining a surprise Ukrainian counteroffensive success on the horizon, or that Vladimir Putin will just keel over and die, is not something we will talk about here. Let's start with what we will call scenario 1, a peace with a strong, secure Ukraine. This is the only peace that Kyiv says is acceptable, built upon rock-solid deterrence against a repeat Russian invasion, even if it comes without all of Ukraine's sovereign territory. The best way to achieve this would be, of course, through NATO membership, bringing the rest of free Ukraine under Article 5 protection. But with many key member states against this idea, including Trump's US, other alternatives like bilateral security guarantees or European boots on the ground would have to be considered. On top of the deterrent, the West would need to continue supplying military and financial aid to Ukraine to help rebuild and recuperate the country and its economy. This all sounds good on paper, but the big question is, why would Russia agree to it? The next scenario, let's call it number 2, is a ceasefire without a secure Ukraine. Russia still stops on the battlefield, but there is no hard deterrence against more military aggression in the future. In fact, there might be no peace deal at all. Instead, nothing more than a shaky ceasefire along the current line. Russia would be able to replenish its stocks of equipment and ammunition and train a large new force of contract soldiers. If any ceasefire comes with some relief from Western sanctions, it would also be easier to recover from its war economically. Ukraine, on the other hand, would have to deal with a wave of massive challenges at home. New elections that would damage unity, a state budget dependent on Western aid, and especially what to do with its mostly mobilized army and the current restrictions on men leaving the country. All of these factors could make Ukraine a lot weaker in a rematch with Russia than it is now. Just like with the Minsk agreements signed 10 years ago, as much as such a ceasefire might look like peace on paper, Russia would be able to violate it as much as it likes, blame Ukraine, and escalate again whenever it sees fit. Those first 2 scenarios are the ones where Russia at least agrees to stop. Now to scenario 3. What happens if they don't? Unless we see a dramatic turn of battlefield fortune for Ukraine, 2025 could see Russia pushing forward more and more on the battlefield, with Kyiv unable to properly replace its losses and cover the length of the front line. If the US under Trump cuts off further aid to Ukraine, these developments could be looming even more quickly. In this scenario, a desperate Ukraine would be forced to sue for peace to avoid losing its independence completely. The point here is that in this case, Russia holds all the power and can, in theory, demand almost anything they want from Ukraine as a price for stopping on the battlefield. This could be anything from limits to military size or constitutional amendments that undermine Ukraine's sovereignty, or, in a more extreme case, Russia could even ask for the handover of more territory, including the cities of Kherson or Zaporizhia, which they consider their own. Now, none of these concessions would be at all acceptable for Ukraine, but they may loom if Russia finds itself in such a dominant position. And finally, just for argument's sake, the fourth scenario is one where neither the US nor Europe can find an answer to the question, why should Russia stop? Feeling momentum on the battlefield and sensing weakness from the West, Moscow rejects any peace plan proposed by Trump. Putin sees no reason not to push for total victory, and the end result depends on Russia's maximalist aims in the war. So what comes next? Trump is coming in at a difficult time. The new president faces an unenviable challenge, bringing two sides with completely irreconcilable positions together. Kyiv has made it clear that it will only settle for scenario 1 peace with a secure deterrence against a future invasion. Russia, in the meantime, is projecting loudly that they aren't interested in any stopping or freezing of the conflict at all. So how can an incoming Trump team possibly try and bring about the peace that he promises?
You said you can end the war in 24 hours. You've even said you want to try to end it before you're sworn into office. You're actively trying to?
I am.
Some reports have suggested they might hope to strike some sort of grand deal. Ukraine doesn't join NATO for 20 years, European peacekeepers are deployed to the contact line, and perhaps some sanctions could even be lifted from Russia. But lo and behold, Moscow has already rejected such a deal outright because, as Ukraine has tried its best to tell the world, Putin did not start this war because of NATO, but because he wanted to conquer or at least subjugate independent Ukraine completely. We still don't know how Trump plans to react to Russia's hardballing. On one hand, he could begin to disengage from the process, laying the blame for Ukraine's predicament at the feet of the Europeans, Zelensky, and especially predecessor Joe Biden. On the other, what Ukrainians are hoping for is that the new president will understand that real peace must come through strength, and Trump must get tough with Putin. But how? The answer almost certainly lies in the balance of power, both in the international arena, but more importantly, on the battlefield. Right now, given the current trajectory of the front line, this balance is slowly tilting in Russia's favor. Russia will only stop at the moment when pressure on all fronts from the battlefield, the economy, and society is enough to convince Putin that continuing will only result in catastrophe, both in the war and at home. Put simply, to achieve a secure peace for independent Ukraine, that balance needs to be first leveled and then pushed into Ukraine's favor. But how? There is no one single solution, and the effort needs to be put in both by the West and by Kyiv to make it happen. Trump still has plenty of leverage to bring down upon Russia if he wants to. The most powerful tool is likely to be economic, tightening sanctions across the board while cooperating with Saudi Arabia to flood the fossil fuel market and starve Russia of the cash that keeps its war machine going. Meanwhile, together with Europe, Trump could commit to a ramping up of military aid for Ukraine over 2025, including more aircraft, long-range missiles, and other systems that have so far been held back. But Trump getting tough on Russia is unlikely to be enough in itself, especially if the current trajectory on the battlefield continues. If Kyiv continues to fall back and bleed territory, any delay to a ceasefire equals more conquered Ukrainian land for Moscow. That's why the only way this can work is if Ukraine can do its part to stabilize its defense along the front line. This means fixing a lot of systemic issues inside the military, including with mobilization, fortifications, training, and command problems. To stop Russia, Kyiv needs to do better with the resources it has and protect the most valuable resource of all, its people. If this works, Russia could start seeing that its plan is doomed and start looking for a way out of this war. Now, that doesn't mean Moscow will immediately agree to a deal with NATO membership or European troops in Ukraine, but it could at least force Russia into a scenario 2 peace, which, with enough sustained support and brave backing from the West, could be consolidated into a scenario 1, deterring Moscow from invading again. If the balance of power is shifted but Putin still refuses to stop, Russia could overextend, burning through men and equipment at an unsustainable rate on the battlefield while the economy tips over into meltdown at home. If, on the other hand, Ukraine and the West fail to do enough to shift the balance of power, that's when we could see things sliding into scenario 3 or even 4. So, to sum up, let's boil everything down to some really basic points. 1. For peace to be achieved, Russia needs to stop. 2. For peace to hold, Russia needs to be deterred from starting again. 3. Russia still wants to destroy independent Ukraine and is unlikely to stop if they feel they are winning. 4. To really achieve peace, Ukraine and a Trump-led West need to break Russia's idea that they can break Ukraine, now and in the future. Thank you for watching. We are able to publish videos like this for free thanks to the support of people around the world, people like you. Consider joining our community and help us keep going. Become a member of the Kyiv Independent for just $5 a month. Thank you.